In a small isolated village, in the heart of the mountains, lived a farmer named Leonard. His farm was modest, but working the land and animals allowed him to live in peace, far from the hustle and bustle of the outside world. The surrounding landscape was breathtakingly beautiful. Green fields bordered by thick hedges, clear streams winding between the rocks and ancient forests, where the trees, majestic and silent, seemed to whisper the secrets of centuries past. The air was pure, heavy with the scents of wildflowers and damp earth, creating a serene atmosphere. Leonardo lived alone in a small stone house, the roof covered with moss and the windows made of wood aged over the years. Loneliness was not a burden for him, because he had learned to accept it. His wife, Elizabeth, had died years ago, taken by a fever that left her frail and frail. Their daughter, born much later, did not survive either. These losses had marked his heart, but over time he had resigned himself to living in the tranquility of the countryside, where nature seemed to compensate for the sadness of his soul. His animals were his only faithful companion. They had replaced the human warmth that life had taken from him. And among them, there was Daphne, his goat, whom he had raised from birth. Daphne was a goat of rare beauty. She had pure white fur, dotted with black spots, and deep brown eyes that seemed almost human in their expressiveness. She was gentle, calm, always close to Leonard, but also with unusual obstinacy for a goat. Once she decided to do something, nothing and no one could stop her. She was an indomitable character, but Leonardo adored her for this independence. He saw her as a member of his family. Together, they had become accustomed to a quiet and routine life, rising at first light and ending their day in the serenity of nightfall. One autumn morning, while a thick mist spread like a veil over the valley, Leonardo got up early as usual. The sky was a pale gray, and the air was cool, but with the promise of change. He wrapped his woolen scarf around his neck, put on his boots and went out into the yard. The sounds of the countryside echoed softly around him. The wind in the trees, the cowbells in the distance, and the cry of a solitary bird. Everything was peaceful, as always. He headed towards the stable, his mind still hazy with sleep, but a strange feeling awoke within him, like a presentiment. Upon entering the stable, Leonardo immediately felt that something was wrong. Daphne, usually calm and quiet, stood near her enclosure, panting, eyes wide, staring at something with unusual intensity. She was surrounded by hay and straw, and her breathing was irregular, as if she had experienced a shocking event. Leonardo hurriedly approached, his heart racing. He expected everything, except what he was going to discover. Next to Daphne, lying on the straw, was a human baby. Leonardo stopped abruptly, his eyes wide. The baby was swaddled in dirty linen, his face peaceful, but so fragile. The child's skin was slightly pink, almost translucent, and his little hands were folded against his body as if instinctively trying to hold on to something. His eyes were closed, and he seemed sound asleep, but in a way that didn't suggest any worry. Leonardo did not understand what he saw. He rubbed his eyes, hoping the haze of sleep that veiled his thoughts would disappear, but the scene remained unchanged. Daphne, the goat, didn't seem scared. On the contrary, she stood close to the child, her head bowed, seeming to watch over him, her eyes tender and protective. Leonardo felt a strange warmth in the animal's gaze, as if inviting him to accept this strange miracle. But how was this possible? Daphne was not a creature capable of carrying a human child. And yet, the baby was there, alive, breathing. Leonardo leaned down slowly, his hands trembling, hesitating to touch the child. He was afraid of breaking the magic of this moment, of disturbing this scene of strange beauty. But the unknown weighed on him. A flood of questions raced through his mind. Where did this child come from? Why did Daphne seem to protect him? He looked around for clues. There was no trace of a human mother. No logical explanation. The baby was there, and Daphne seemed to have nursed him, keeping him by her side. After a few moments that seemed like hours, Leonard stood up, overcome by a feeling of panic. He ran out of the stable to get help. But no one believed him. The villagers laughed at him when he told them his story. Some just shrugged their shoulders, Others called him crazy. Goats can't have human children, the old blacksmith told him with a mocking smile. You must have been dreaming, Leonard.
It's impossible.
Returning to the farm alone with such a story that seemed too absurd to be true was torture. Leonardo returned to the stable, where he remained alone for a long time, observing the child. There was nothing supernatural in the air, nothing that would allow him to understand what he was experiencing. The baby appeared perfectly human, but the origin of its presence was an absolute mystery. Daphne did not move, watching over him like a vigilant mother. Leonardo made a decision. He had to find out what was going on. He could not ignore this event. But inside him there was also a growing fear. What if this baby wasn't just a miracle, but something else?
A creature from another world?
Or a sign he wasn't ready to understand. He knew his life was going to change forever. And he wondered if destiny had not confronted him with something even greater and incomprehensible than anything he had known until then. The weeks passed, and Leonardo could no longer ignore the strange reality that was imposed on him. The child grew, slowly but surely, like any infant, but he retained an almost fusional bond with Daphne. He refused the cow's milk that Leonardo tried to give him, preferring to suckle directly from the goat, like a kid. When he slept, he would curl up against her, finding refuge in the warmth of her fur, and in the morning, he would let out little moans that sounded more like bleating than human crying. At first, Leonardo tried to ignore these disturbing details, convinced that the child would gradually regain a more conventional humanity. But as the months went by, he had to face the facts. This child was not ordinary. The villagers, at first incredulous, began to whisper. At the market, in the village square, in the shadows of the narrow streets, rumors arose and spread like wildfire. Some saw him as a miracle, a child abandoned by the gods and entrusted to Daphne as a divine sign. Others, more wary, spoke in hushed tones of curses, murmuring that nature itself had rejected it and that men had better do the same. Leonardo oscillated between affection and concern. The child, whom he named Noah, was exceptionally intelligent. Even before he could speak, he understood people's gestures and emotions with uncanny acuity. His dark eyes shone with an indefinable, deep, almost unfathomable glow. He observed his surroundings with unusual intensity, as if he understood things that eluded others. But what terrified Leonard the most were the times when Noah changed. Sometimes, as night fell on the farm and the icy wind rushed through the cracks in the walls, Leonardo heard abnormal noises coming from the stable. As he slipped outside, a lantern in his hand, he saw Noah, crouching near Daphne, his eyes shining with a bestial gleam. The child sometimes seemed to hear sounds that Leonardo did not perceive, his ears quivering imperceptibly, his body tense as if he were perceiving an invisible presence. One winter evening, as the snow fell silently on the village roofs, Leonardo made a decision. He had to get answers. He wrapped Noah in a thick blanket and hugged him before setting off towards the village. As soon as he set foot on the main square, he felt eyes turning towards him. The conversations stopped, and a heavy silence settled. Some crossed themselves discreetly when seeing the child, others averted their eyes, as if his mere presence was a bad omen. The village priest, Father Augustine, an old man with aged skin and piercing eyes, approached slowly. His gaze fell on the child, and he frowned slightly. Then, taking Leonard aside, he spoke in a low voice. "What you found," he murmured, "is perhaps not a blessing. This child, he is not like us. He is not made of the same flesh, of the same breath." Leonardo felt a shiver run down his spine. "What do you mean?" he asked hoarsely. The priest placed a light hand on Leonardo's shoulder and fixed him with a serious look. "He could be a messenger, an instrument of something beyond us."
An ancient, forgotten force.
Or, he let a silence settle in, scrutinizing Noah's sleeping features. Or, he is the incarnation of a curse that we do not yet understand. Leonardo no longer knew who to trust. Every day, the child revealed new facets of his personality, oscillating between innocent sweetness and disturbing outbursts of violence. He could be tender, snuggling against Leonard or Daphne with childlike warmth, seeking comfort and security. But at other times, a strange glint would invade his eyes, and his gaze would become icy, almost calculating. Incidents multiplied. One night, when Leonardo had dozed off near the hearth, he was startled awake by howling in the stable. He rushed outside and found Noah standing among the goats, his little body quivering in the flickering light of the lantern. Around him, the beasts stood frozen, terrified, their eyes reflecting unspeakable fear.
Asmelo ferzan diron uninder.
Leonardo advanced cautiously. The child slowly turned his head towards him. His breathing was short, irregular. His hands trembled, and when he raised them slightly, Leonardo noticed with horror that they were stained with a dark liquid. A goat lay motionless at his feet.
Noah, what did you do?
He whispered, his throat tight. The child blinked, his expression unreadable. Then, as if a veil fell over his face, he began to cry, throwing himself into Leonardo's arms with the innocence of a toddler in distress. But Leonardo could no longer ignore what he had just seen. The days passed, and the village became a field of murmurs. Those who had seen Noah grow up were torn between fascination and fear. Some saw him as a misunderstood blessing, a being destined to accomplish great things. Others, more superstitious, said that he was living proof of a cursed pact, that his presence sullied the very land on which they lived. Secret meetings were organized. One evening, as Leonardo returned from the well, he overheard a conversation between several villagers near the church. "There's nothing human about this child," one of them said in a low voice. "We can't let this continue.
Something must be done.
What if we hurt him and the curse falls on us all?" replied a woman, worried. "It already is. We must act before it is too late." Leonardo felt a shiver run down his spine. He then understood that he no longer had a choice. He couldn't stay here any longer. Overwhelmed, he made the obvious decision to leave. Leave the village before the situation deteriorates, before they decide to attack Noah. He prepared his backpack in silence, slipping a few provisions into a bag. Noah, as if sensing the urgency of the situation, remained strangely silent. He watched Leonardo with an intensity that made him uncomfortable, as if he understood every thought that crossed his mind.
As a cross the threshold, a silhouette stood out from the shadows.
The village priest, Father Augustine, stood there, his serious gaze fixed on them. "You're leaving," he whispered. "I have no choice," replied Leonard. The old man nodded slowly, then placed a hand on his shoulder. "Then listen to me carefully, Leonard. If you leave with him, you won't come back. The outside world will not understand what you found here. This child, he is not what you think. He is more than just a creature." Leonardo felt his heart tighten. "What do you mean?" "You will find out. But remember, what lies beneath innocence can sometimes be greater, and more terrible, than we can imagine." Then he stepped back, leaving Leonard and Noah to sink into the night. They walked for a long time, fleeing the murmurs and mistrust, moving away from the village and its past. The road was uncertain, the dark mountains looming before them like silent giants. Leonardo didn't know where this journey would take them, but he knew one thing: Noah's story was only just beginning. And in the shadow of the snowy peaks, something seemed to be waiting for them.